Stephen, I'd like to find out a little bit of the early years before you got into law. I read an article where you mentioned that you had family members that were in the bookmaking business. What was it that made you decide to go into law, and specifically criminal law initially?
Well, when I grew up, we were sort of on the wrong side of the law. Although I don't believe my family was doing anything injurious to other people, but I come from a family of sports bookmakers. So lawyers were always involved in our life in one way or another. Typically, the lawyer would get blamed. I recall an incident when I was staying at my grandfather's house in Florida, and I woke up in the morning and his car was gone. Apparently, some governmental authority seized the car, and of course, that was the lawyer's fault. So I've always been fascinated by lawyers. I've always been interested in law, and I've always had a passion for trial law.
Yeah. How did you come to that decision to focus on civil cases and kind of drop the criminal work?
Well, I did in the early part of my career, the first 4 or 5 years, I was doing almost exclusively criminal work. And I loved the trial practice. I loved the work. But to be honest, it's sometimes got a little depressing because you are representing criminals, even though you wind up knowing and liking the people that you represented. And I represented a woman where we had an unfortunate end. She had been charged with murder. We lost a jury trial. I lost a jury trial, but was able to get it overturned on prosecutorial misconduct. She then pled guilty to a lesser offense and received a 5-year sentence. If you looked at her criminal background closely, this might have not been the first time she either injured or hurt someone. Although she was a hardworking, proud woman, she just liked to play craps and had maybe a little bit of a drinking issue. So once and I remember the case started, the first case where I got a call from her where she said, typical comment by some of the people who would represent, they say I killed a woman in a bar. So I went to met her, and that had the first result, and she wound up with a 5-year sentence for voluntary manslaughter, and she only served 1 year of it. And she got out on work release and was living with this nice old guy that for some reason had married her during the first trial. And maybe within an hour, they got into a little argument about the car, and apparently she killed him. And she called me up and said, it was like deja vu. They say I killed my husband. And I didn't even, at that point, even fully recognize that she had been out of jail. And I still had an affection for the woman. So I went to the jail and visited her. And obviously, she now had a very hopeless situation. And the sad part about it is she hung herself in the jail. And from her point of view, it may have been a rational decision because life had just come at her from so many different ways. But it was that and other similar incidences that said it took away the enjoyment of the work, representing people that you really cared about, who may go to jail, who may not go to jail, but deserve to go to jail. And your compensation was different. I've always been someone entrepreneurial. And when I discovered contingency work, what attracted to me very strongly was it's a combination of both trial work, which I love, and the ability to be rewarded in direct proportion to your success for the client. I didn't like flat fees. I still don't. I don't like hourly fees. I think they're ludicrous. But I think the contingent fee is the purest form of representation where if you succeed and if the client succeeds, you succeed, and you're compensated in direct proportion to your skill as a lawyer, your inability to innovate, your ability to be creative. And that's how I got into the civil end of things. And initially, as starting out, it's somewhat of a difficult struggle to get the cases.
Right.
You can't forget that you need the cases to be a successful lawyer. So the cases I would get would not be the easiest cases. They would be more difficult cases. The cases maybe that other lawyers weren't as interested in handling because they didn't view them to be profitable. So that forced me to be as creative as I possibly could, as innovative as I possibly could, to succeed in areas where other lawyers weren't necessarily working. And in the early days, that's what started us out to the firm we have today. If it sort of morphs into our niche area of nursing home litigation. You might ask, well, how would you get into an area like that? Now we're going way back to the 1989. Perhaps you weren't born then, I'm not sure. Or you may have been very young. And so I kindly old, it's sort of a reverse of the typical nursing home case. A kindly old woman contacted me and said her son, who was developmentally disabled, had been living in a nursing home for a long period of time, fell down a flight of stairs inside the nursing home and died.
Jeez.
And in those days, that wouldn't be the type of case a conventional personal injury lawyer would take, because no one was dependent on him. He wasn't working. He had no medical bills. And he obviously had a different sort of life than a healthy male. And so in conventional legal terms, personal injury terms, that case didn't have sufficient value for the typical personal injury lawyer to take it. So we did some research and we discovered a statute on the books in Illinois that had been on the books for maybe 10 years that no one had ever used. And it was called the Nursing Home Care Act. And that was an act that was designed to encourage personal injury lawyers to file lawsuits on behalf of nursing home residents as an adjunct to governmental. It was an enforcement action. In other words, residents, family members, those who saw a wrong at a nursing home could contact the lawyer could take the case, and in addition to the usual recovery that could be obtained, you could get attorney's fees, and in those days, triple damages. So what they're really saying is there was a big problem in the nursing home industry. Government doesn't have the resources to remedy that. We want to get private attorneys involved. Most private attorneys don't want these cases, so we're going to highly incentivize them to take the case. And for reasons that I've never been able to understand, no one had noticed this law on the books for 10 years. So we filed probably the first case in Illinois under the Nursing Home Care Act for this 50-year-old son of our 70-year-old client, and that's how we got started. And the case had a successful outcome, but to give you an idea what was happening, it was hard to get experts, because you would talk to an expert and an expert would say, wow, that's terrible care, but this is a nursing home. What do you expect? So there was no standard of care. There was no expectation that you would receive, appropriate supervision and guidance, even though the law that was in Illinois and eventually enacted federally was on the books. So there's some funny incidents from that case, but I don't know how detailed you want me to get into.
Yeah, well, you led me right down this path, and it's exactly where I wanted to go. Was you were a pioneer in this field, and in the late '80s, there were hardly any of these cases, and like you said, most personal injury attorneys didn't see the value of these cases, and you found this law, and it allowed you to pursue them. But let's talk about what are the significant differences between pursuing just a standard personal injury case and a case against a long-term care facility?
Well, it has evolved since the late 80s. And to just back up for a second, when I went to the first national meeting concerning plaintiff lawyers who handled nursing home cases, I was one of 4 people. And I'm not even sure if the other people actually had a case, they just had heard about it. So no one was doing it. So now, if you go to that same convention, there'll be thousands of people. There's obviously ads all over the TV and radio for this type of cases, and it's become a huge area of litigation.
Right.
Uh, but when I started, it was zero, nothing, no such cases. So what we began to recognize is, number one, what distinguished it is we could, like a civil rights statute or an employment discrimination statute, if we won the case, the defendant would have to pay our attorney's fees. So even if they viewed the case of having a lesser value, they couldn't refuse to settle, because if we went to trial and won, they'd have to pay our fees. And in those days, triple damages. That's no longer the case, but that's how it was. The second huge change, and we take some credit for this, is that we recognize that when you talk about non-economic damages, we're not talking about medical bills, we're not talking about lost wages, we're talking about non-economic damages, pain and suffering, disability and disfigurement. We founded our practice on the belief that jurors will recognize that in an elderly person, no matter how many medical conditions they have. So they will look at the wrong. And if they believe a nursing home put profits over people, misallocated resources, didn't have sufficient staffing, and an elderly resident of a nursing home was injured or died, they would compensate that a death or injury with significant money damages. And that was a perception that had to be changed, because the defense model is all cases are worth some mathematical formula, X amount of times medical, right, wage loss, something tangible. What we do in the nursing home area is get people to realize, to recognize what we believe are the true fundamental important things in life, which is quality of life. So it's, it's not that our clients are going to die, it's how they die. And people are entitled to die with dignity, free of injury, free of mistreatment, free of neglect. And that's a concept that now is widely accepted. Well, I wouldn't say widely accepted. It's accepted, but there are still some people who, like referring lawyers, will say what we view as a nursing home tragedy, and they'll say to us, do you want this case? I'm not sure there's anything here. I say, no, that's the type of cases we handle. So that's the evolution. But it is a specialty area because it has its own laws. It has its own standards of care. It has its own expert witnesses. There's an art to reading a chart. There's an art to finding the people that are really responsible, because some of these nursing homes are very good at hiding who really controls the facility. It involves a knowledge of many of the issues that are sort of endemic to the operation of long-term care facilities. So it is different than, we still do medical malpractice, but it's different than it's different than a medical malpractice case. It's typically, in a medical malpractice case, it might just be a mistake that a doctor made on that day.
Right.
In a nursing home case, they're set up to fail. They just don't have the staff, the resources. For some reason, the owners feel they can't make the money they need to make if they're given good care. So it's more like institutional neglect.
Right.
I can give you one more example. You think of the Titanic. Why did all those people die? Because the Titanic crashed into the iceberg, or because the owners of the ship wanted to have more cabins so they had less lifeboats. So it was an inevitable problem if wrong. And that sort of describes nursing homes.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, so thank you, first of all, for that very detailed answer. That's incredible. And you mentioned a lot of things there. You mentioned kind of just briefly about, the expert witnesses, how to understand what's going on with these individuals versus a standard case. And I want to talk about kind of how your marketing's impacted. Have you found that, because we niche ourselves, have you found that there has ever been confusion from your consumers when you're trying to highlight this sub area of PI, where maybe they think you only do nursing home abuse or neglect cases? What kind of what are the steps that you do to market this sub niche, but still take on, the PI, the MVA, those bread and butter type cases?
That's a great question, and it's a very incisive question, because that has been a struggle for the decades that we've been doing this. So, what you get the typical thing where we've had very good success in medical malpractice cases and birth injury cases, but a consumer will go to a lawyer and they'll say, "Oh, we're talking to you, and we're talking to Levin and Perconti." And they'll say, "Oh, Levin Perconti is an unbelievable nursing home lawyer, but we're the guy we have to go to
Right.
for med mal." So we've never, the short answer to your question, I have not found the perfect way to do that. Or even, I'm not even sure the right way. What I did learn, having a niche allows you to really have a targeted, focused marketplace and really become an expert in a certain area. And, through all the typical ways, digital, public relations, now we're doing TV. So being an expert in an area, an actual true expert, has been great for marketing. And in fact, our challenge is any sophisticated, fully rational consumer who's looking to hire a nursing home lawyer in Illinois would hire us. There's just no reason. We do 3 times better than anyone else on individual cases. But how you communicate that to the consumers who have many different, inputs to decide what lawyer to choose is difficult. Now to your question of what do we do about the rest of the area that we're successful in? I mean, currently we're thinking of it in terms of divisions. We have the nursing home division, we have the medical malpractice division. In the past, we've sort of focused on results. We sort of hoped that everyone knew we were the nursing home experts, but would mix our nursing home case results with our other results so people would think of us, in other ways. But I've struggled. Maybe you have an answer to this.
Well, I struggle myself. So that's why I was asking you that. To be honest, it was a little self-serving, because your avatar, your potential prospective client's completely different. You've got an elderly individual versus maybe someone that just got their driver's license that got in a car wreck. I would imagine, though, there is certainly a clear benefit from exactly what you said on those peer referrals, because the attorneys know who can get the maximum value for the cases. I think that, the challenge would be to the consumer.
Right. It's the challenge to the consumer is 2 parts. The first part is figure out a way in 30 seconds or a minute or 2 minutes or by articles to really show them you're the best. Actually convince them of what's true. And then secondly, now try to say that just isn't all that we do.
Right.
So we recently formed an alliance with, we recently have a joint venture with 2 of the best birth injury lawyers in the United States. And so now, we played around with from, birth till death. I mean, we're covering both ends of the spectrum. But I think in today's world, in the legal field, a lot of the firms have divisions.
Right.
The big advertising, both, the mass stores, they all have divisions. So I think it's much easier to think about it today as division. So I don't think we're struggling as much, but there is always that fear, the more successful we are in nursing homes, the less opportunity you have to get involved in the really big medical malpractice or catastrophic personal injury cases, because our competitors will use our expertise in nursing home against us. And that's a hard sell. In birth injury, we may have solved that problem because we literally have a joint venture with maybe the top birth injury lawyer in the country, so no one could say that. So that's another idea. But honestly, as long as I practice and as long as I market, I think of new ideas every day. I mean, you wish you could come up with the perfect plan right in the beginning, but
Yeah, and
of course
I
the
would
other,
say you're doing something incredibly right because you definitely, your firm, and on your website, and who knows when it was updated last on the copy. So you've had results over 600 million. It's just been incredible. So it definitely works, and I applaud you for choosing a specialization because if you're, it's this same old, if you had this, if your heart was beating and you had a pain and you thought, who would be the best person to solve my heart issue? Would it be the general practitioner or would it be the heart surgeon? Not knowing anything about him, I would choose the heart surgeon all day. And then, by the way, I wouldn't ask him how much they cost. It'd be worth it because it's value based, like what you said earlier on those value based fees. Um,
maybe that should be our, maybe that should be our ad. You're giving me an idea. If you had a heart problem, would you go to a general practitioner or a heart surgeon?
right, right.
That
Because
I think
everyone,
that
yeah, it recognizes it's a simple analogy. Yeah, so let's talk about mentorship. So I read this quote that so your sister said in an interview, once that you raised her as a lawyer and have continued to do that with many other of the young lawyers. So how important is mentorship to you and to the success of your firm?
I mean, I think it's crucially important. The three things are litigation skills, the ability to rainmake, and in my belief, education and training of younger lawyers in law and in general. And we're fortunate to have 4 children and now 15 grandchildren. And I always, in partnership with my wife, actively mentored my kids. I mean, I parented them. You could say maybe my wife did the hard job of parenting, which requires skills I don't have, like consistency and inflexibility and rules. But so which enabled me to mentor the kids. I always, we had a rule in our family sort of, okay, we're going to have an argument. You're going to get angry. You're going to close your mind. You're not going to hear what I have to say. So let's slow down for a second. Let's think about what I have to say. You may agree, you may disagree, but you have to respond to what I'm saying. You just can't say nonsense. And maybe I'll convince you. If I don't, you still may have to do it my way, but let's try to go through this exercise. And it sort of became, they talk about a business culture, it sort of became the family culture. That even today, and I'm fortunate to have very, very successful kids who are probably more, I may be the poorest male in the family right now, but they still can't. If no one can make a point that's stupid, no one can say something irrational. It's just not part of what we do. It's immediately recognized and belittled or whatever is happening. So, but I enjoy doing that. I've always enjoyed doing that, and I took the same philosophy to the practice of law. I mean, I love working with young or inexperienced, engaged lawyers who I can mentor, and we've had great success. Some of them have, out-achieved us in certain ways, but I spend a huge amount of time working with them, talking with them. I have a younger partner, and everyone likes to tell him, "Oh, you're his clone," and some people would be insecure about that. But he said, "Well, maybe I am." He said, but he knows that in certain areas he has exceeded me, and he has the confidence to take everything I have to give him without an ego, and then build on that in his own way. So we recently we met like this. So people talk about it. So we now give these joint talks because it's sort of an easier way to talk when we play off each other, and we dress the same as if it was an accident, and we never commented. So you get all the notes from the people. Are they really
Uh,
dressed? You think that was an accident? But anyway, but mentorship is, and I have a younger now female partner, and the same thing. She's a different personality. I mentor her in different ways, But it is truly what we pride ourselves on as a firm, and it's not work because I love doing it.
That's incredible. And I kind of, as a follow up there, just specifically, what are some of the things that you do to mentor? Is it shadowing? Is it meeting cadences for like like an educational, teaching kind of classroom setting? What does mentorship look like?
I think it's fundamentally more informal than teaching, although that's a part of it. I think it's shadowing. I always remember the model that they used to use in the talent agency business, where you'd work for like the top agent, like this, Ari Emanuel or something like that, and the trainee would actually be on the phone for every one of the calls. So number one, that allowed the trainee to act immediately on whatever is happening. But number two, just being around someone. It's like a kid who's like his parents, right? It's because they're around them and they just get certain behaviors by proximity. So I thought that was a great model. It wouldn't exactly work in the legal context, but that's how I mentored. So I spent time with them both at work and socially. Again, it was enjoyable to me to do that. It was stimulating to me. One thing about mentoring is whenever you mentor somebody, you learn something yourself. Just the dialogue forces you to think. Just like as we're talking now, and I'm thinking, wow, what a great idea. Would you go to a general practitioner if you needed heart surgery? Those ideas get generated. So that's one way, informal, watching me on the phone, watching me do whatever I do in court, watching how I interact with people marketing wise or networking wise or social wise. And then number two, intense discussion about cases. And for some reason, and there must be a neurocognitive reason that I don't know, it's very hard to think how to handle a case just in your own head. When you talk to someone else and bounce ideas off them, for some reason, a process is created that is deeper, better, more thoughtful, and it generates ideas on both sides of the thing. So we talk about cases in very specific terms. I think what makes really good lawyers from average lawyers is the ability to anticipate what the other side is going to do. We all know what we want to say. We all have our own approach, and hopefully we're good at it because that's what we do. And, so I know how to prove my case. What I need to know before the process even starts is what is the other side going to do? What are their arguments going to be? And can we nip them in the bud? Can we reframe the issues sometimes before they even think of them as being issues? Can we do that? And so that's how we discuss cases. What is this case really about? Which really boils down to what is the other side going to say as a defense? Because we do have an advantage as plaintiff lawyers, we get to choose our cases. The defense is stuck with whatever they get. But so that's a large part of mentoring, and that just sort of morphs into reframing in general. Good trial lawyers know how to frame and reframe issues. And hopefully we're on the right side. I mean, I could give you a specific example.
Sure.
Talking too much, we could cut some out, but I'll give you a specific example. We're representing a 65-year-old gentleman whose almost 85 or 90-year-old mother is in an assisted living facility. During the course of her 6-month admission, she gets 18 horrible pressure ulcers or bed sores while in the facility. It was obvious that she was in the wrong facility. It wasn't that she was getting bad care. They just didn't have nurses to turn and reposition to do all the things. So we take the case. So what's the defense going to say? So at the first deposition, the head nurse or whatever they call it in assisted living starts to say, well, we talked to your client And we told her this facility wasn't appropriate for his mom, but he insisted on, staying there, which was probably which was a lie. And it wasn't documented anywhere in the charge.
Right.
So now the average lawyer would attack on that basis. We train ourselves to hear it differently. So what does that mean? That means the person who made that statement, one of the issues in the case is proving the facility was inappropriate for our client. The person who made that statement knew her facility was inappropriate. She knew that what was going to happen was going to happen. So we got it down. I got through my questioning, so every minute of every hour of every day of every week, your resident was deteriorating and you knew you couldn't treat it. And you just saw it happen. And not only if it was this bad, I'm sure you told everyone in the facility. So there wasn't a single person in the facility who didn't know that she was not appropriate for your place and she was suffering on a daily basis. So of course, by the time I get through it, she says, well, maybe the son didn't say that to me. Maybe he said that to me at the end. But it's how you hear the issue. Like they say, bed alarms don't prevent falls. That's what nursing homes say. You could argue with that. I say they don't prevent falls. I could put a bed alarm on you and you could fall, right? People responding to bed alarms prevent falls. So all issues need to be framed in a way that's really true and that will resonate with a jury. And it seems like a simple process, but I'm sure in your business it's the same thing. How you frame things sometimes is so difficult to come to. When you finally understand, when you finally got it where you want it, where you understand it, you realize why did it take me, 100 hours of conversation to get there?
Yeah, it's that Bloom's taxonomy, right? It's at the very, at the bottom, you can read something, you got some recall, you kind of go up the triangle and you can analyze. And at the very top, what you're talking about is you can kind of see and do those advanced retrospectives in a different manner and kind of interpret what they're saying differently. And that's a skill that you acquire from your expertise. I imagine that if you received that case, your first nursing home abuse case, you probably would have took just the direct track.
Right. And what's scary is when you think of your life, let's say in 5-year segments, and you think you knew a lot when you get to be my age 20 years ago, and now you know so much different. You wonder how you got by with what you knew 20 years ago or 15 years ago. So it's a fascinating process.
Absolutely. So let's switch over to a personal question, then we'll finish with our final 3 for 3. So, I was doing some research, and I believe you married your childhood sweetheart, whom you met when you were 11. So this is another self-serving question here, being married. So what's your secret to a long-lasting marriage?
Number one, I have to say, because of COVID, my wife is within earshot, so I hear a lot of silence over her section of the room waiting for this answer. So I think it's having the same goals. I mean, there's love and all that other stuff, but it's having the same goals. And we have the same goals of the importance of family and raising a family and raising grandchildren. So our strongest bond is through that family, and we're very blessed to have the family that we do have. And that is number one most important thing in our life. And, whenever you're tempted, it's a dangerous path. And our kids, we have, a daughter, she's married, and our sons are all married. And, when you introduce other people into the family, the daughter-in-law, mother-in-law relationship is not always smooth, or the issues between siblings, but we've agreed and we fully act on it that there's nothing more important than family unity. So nothing trumps that. And I think that's a huge part of the longevity of our marriage.
And Stephen, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show, and it's been great speaking with you.
Same here, and maybe we'll do it again sometime.
Sounds good.
Thank you for your questions. It really triggered some great thoughts.
Absolutely. Absolutely.